Welcome to another episode of Seize the Moment podcast. I'm Alen. That's
I'm
Leon.
Leon.
That's right. And today we're going to talk about our favorite podcasts, why we like them, what inspires us about them, or if it's just, just to laugh, just to enjoy. Um, we'll talk about that. So, Leon, I guess, what's one of your favorite podcasts?
That is a great question. So the first podcast that I would mention is the Lex Fridman podcast. So for those of you guys who don't know, so Lex Fridman, who's like a staple on the Joe Rogan show, he has a bunch of kind of like intellectuals and obviously different types of guests and kind of different types of fields. And so I'm sure you know Alan, obviously, because you listen to him all the time. Lex has really dope guests, and they talk about kind of like sort of ways of, I guess, kind of progressing humanity in a nutshell. So if you're like looking for podcasts in terms of growth and in terms of personal development, so for me at least, Lex Fridman is like the go-to guy. What do you think?
Yeah, I like Lex. Lex is cool. I like how he prefaces a lot of things with like his emotions with, this is a Russian way of thinking about things.
Mhm.
This is my Russian way of expressing myself, and I like it because it's cool. You don't see too many people in mainstream culture doing that, especially with our backgrounds as as a Russian, Ukrainian, or Georgian, and all that. And I like that he definitely presents our culture and does it justice in a way. Although I'm not really a culture sort of guy, I'm fine with diversity of culture, but it's cool to see somebody kind of representing in that sense.
Yeah.
He's definitely a genius. He's a deep thinker. Talks a lot about existentialism, why we're here, why do we exist, what's our purpose, what are we here to create, right? And he relates that a lot to his specialty, which is artificial intelligence. And one of the things that he wants to create is like a robot companion, one that's
Hmm.
as sentient as a human, um, but uh, but technological, right? And that's fascinating. I've heard there's actually some progress in that field, um,
Wait,
and I
what's the
wonder how long it'll be till we.
what's the point? What is he trying to get out of that? Like he actually like wants to live with this companion, or is this just like for the purpose of just having said that he created it? It's like a thing like that.
So that's interesting that you asked that. So I wonder if his view has changed now, but what he had said when he was first on Joe Rogan's podcast, which it was that he wanted to create like a female robot
Hmm.
companion, someone he can love and loves him back, right?
Hmm.
Um, and I thought that was interesting, right? Rogan was kind of flabbergasted. He's like, "Why? Why do you need that from a robot? Why can't you just meet a girl out there and all that?" And I forget what Lex's reply was, but I think it's just that he feels that humans are very messy
Hmm.
and very contradictory, and will think one way one day, feel one way, and then change the very next. And there's this lack of predictability to them, which you could argue actually is what makes humans so unique and so wonderful too, because of that lack of predictability.
Right.
But it's like a double-edged sword, right? It on one level, that's a beautiful thing. We're not these rigid, unchanging creatures, right? Although a lot of times we like to behave that way, personality-wise, we may develop rigid personalities, but in actuality, we're not. We're human beings, right? Like literally in a constant state of being. There's a constant change is the only
Right.
constant, right? So um, yeah, I wonder if his perspective has changed though. I don't think he's averse to going out there, meeting girls and having some kind of like companion like that. But definitely it's his passion to create a sentient AI or to help create it. I know he works with Elon Musk too. which is pretty cool. And he
Mhm.
knows him very well. He's had him on his podcast. So like if anyone's interested in seeing what an interview with Elon Musk looks like in a long form sort of way, instead of getting those like tidbits of news or like game stonks or hashtag Bitcoin or the memes that Elon will post, instead of getting tidbits of him like that, you can
Yeah.
see, I believe there's more than 2 interviews on Lex's show with Elon. One on Rogan too, if you wanted to pivot to Rogan.
Mhm.
But yeah.
Yeah, and you know, like what's I guess would be probably funny for some people is I actually didn't get into Lex because of the AI stuff. I actually know nothing about artificial intelligence, how it's created, why people want to create it, or what the motives are behind it. So for me, the reason why I like Lex is because he had particular like intellectuals on from like the fields of philosophy and psychology, like Sheldon Solomon. So like for me, right, he's more of I don't even know what the right term would be, but I guess he's more of like a facilitator, I guess, of like psychological or emotional growth. And for me, he is like, I don't know, a computer scientist, or I don't know, what are they called? Like people who develop AI? Is there like a specific sort of name for their field or no?
Mm, it's not a mechanical engineer.
Okay, so
um
what? Okay, that's good enough. I don't know
yeah,
anything about that.
see, I
Yeah, so
also
it's
don't
interesting.
know. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I'm assuming like most people like his podcast because they're thinking like, oh, like he's going to talk about like futurism and technology and whatever. Like I couldn't care less about that. So what's cool about him is that I think and I think we're kind of basing what we're doing off of like his platform in addition to Rogan too. But for us, I think the idea is that like we're trying to get sort of different people from different fields, even fields that we're not even well versed in. Like when we had John Berman on, right? Like we're not experts in vaccines, but I think what we're doing is we're trying as best as we can to have like an all-around program where it's like there are going to be topics that we're experts in, and then obviously they're going to be sort of people who come on and they're going to talk about things that we have like no clue or mostly no clue about. So with Lex, I feel like for him, he really helped us develop that kind of platform. And why I got into him, again, I don't listen to every show, and I definitely don't even listen to the AI stuff. But I think he's really I think what he does is very similar to what we kind of do, like, because obviously we picked up on it. What he does is, even though he's like an expert in that field, and I assume when he has like those people on, he probably can like shoot the shit with them really well and talk about these different ideas. For us though, right, why I think we're good, or why he resemble, or I get why we probably resemble him, is because what he's doing, right, when he talks to like psychologists, philosophers, he's super curious and inquisitive. So he's able to pretty much say like, hey guys, I don't really know too much about this stuff, but I love to have these people on. So like, our audience, as long as me, oh, I'm sorry, as well as me. So our audience, as well as me, we could kind of learn from these different people and learn these different approaches to, I don't know, whatever, philosophy, psychology, and the kind of various fields they're in. So I really love that. And Rogan pretty much does the same thing. And I think my hope is that like our podcast is sort of like in that kind of vein too.
One thing that I definitely appreciate about a good podcaster, someone like Lex, is he genuinely has an interest in his field and also the fields of the guests that he wants to have on, right? And because of that genuine interest, I feel like that sort of transfers through the screen, or if somebody's listening, it transfers auditorily
Right.
too. It feels interesting because they're interested, right? So sometimes I can listen to somebody in a field, that's a guest on Lex's show. Let's say it's and he was on Rogan's show too. His name is Dr. Ben Gertzfeld. He's the COO, I think, of Hanson Robotics. They're the company that created the Sophia robot, which is this
Mhm.
human-like robot. It doesn't have like, it's still, you can still see the gears and different machinations in the skull, but
Mhm.
it's actually pretty good at having conversations with people. And I think it has she has, sorry, different certifications or like licenses to or sorry, passports, like over 20 different passports, all these different countries. It's like the first robot to be like treated that way. So it's funky what's going on behind the scenes with that. But why Dr. Ben Gertzfeld was interesting is he's also a futurist in a way. Well, not just a futurist, he actually has a team that's working on creating a generally intelligent AI. So general intelligence is creativity, right? The ability to not just computate, like you put in a certain formula, or you put in a certain programming, and the machine is subject to that programming, and they won't do anything outside of what they're programmed to do. That's essentially what's um, fascinating about programming and machines in general, right? They won't do anything outside of what you program them to do. However, if they were essentially to create a generally intelligent AI that had creativity, that could make its own decisions and was sentient, well, imagine that plus the computation speed of a computer. Imagine the things that they could come up with. Imagine what they can then create too in turn. And then what kind of exponential growth would lead from that. For example, if you created the first generally intelligent AI, all of a sudden it started marshaling resources, and because it's computating things so quickly, way faster than we ever would, it may make progress that would have taken us 200 years to create. In I don't know what the actual time frame is. You'd have to listen to one of Lex's podcasts, but by orders of magnitude um, less. So maybe instead of 200 years, it might be 10 years. It might be a year. It might be 5 years, whatever. One of Dr. Ben Gertzfeld's cool ideas was that once you actually create that a generally intelligent AI, it may start coming up with Nobel Prize winning discoveries every other second, right? And I really wonder what the implications of that are when that first, arrives into the world. There's also Dr. Ray Kurzweil. Have you heard of him before?
No.
No. He is he's predicting that there's going to be a technological singularity. Although, and he has made lots of different predictions about lots of different things. I suggest anyone listening just to look into the things that he's predicted before and been able to sort of use Moore's law to predict different technological developments pretty accurately. So he thinks in 2048, that's when we'll have this AI singularity, this general intelligent AI that's going to shift everything. But yeah, this guy, Dr. Ben Gertzfeld, thinks that that's going to happen way sooner. And that was just very fascinating
Interesting
to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's like, wow, yeah, that's actually so. I mean, so again, there's like this kind of like this human component to Lex's show, which I obviously love, and then there's obviously sort of this dreamer component, right, where you're sort of thinking about like technological advances, the future, whatever, very kind of science fiction like, but possibly realistic too. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's like one of the well, for me again, the psychology and the human aspect of it is the main reason why I like Lex's show. So there's another show. Have you ever heard of the Hidden Brain podcast?
Yeah.
Okay, that's like one of my favorites. So it's an NPR show, and it's literally like, so the guy covers, I forgot his name, man. So he covers like pretty much like different like aspects of cognitive distortions and like, different kind of biases that we have and different sort of things that we believe that are not necessarily true and that negatively affect our lives and our health and our mental health. So like he has like, let's say like, why is it that rich people are never satisfied? And why is it that if let's say you're going to be rich, right, you're never going to be satisfied? Why do we have a constant desire to compare to other people? And why is it that we only compare it upwardly? Right. And then he would have like an episode on the halo effect and how we would essentially, so we would take like a particularly good trait and then we would kind of, let's say, generalize or infer from that a whole character. And it's like, this person is beautiful, therefore they're amazing. Or this person is amazing, right? Even therefore they're beautiful. You can do that too. So why I love the Hidden Brain so much is because like, I think it's only about 30 to 50 minutes and he'll have a guest on. But what's so interesting is the way like his show is pieced together. So in the beginning, the show will be like some sort of like example, right? He will give you like a story, right? In the story, it highlights whatever distortion he's going to talk about or think about. So you have like that part, right? Then the second part of it is where he outlines what the distortion is and how like it was kind of how it was pretty much exemplified in his story. And then after that, he'll have a particular guest come on for maybe about 15 to 20 minutes, and then the guest guest will kind of give them like let's say a more sort of professional or academic understanding of it, and how another kind of like, or more examples of it. And why I really love that show is that like it gives, so first of all, it's entertaining as fuck, but then on top of that, like it's super educational, but it doesn't bombard you with information. So it's not like, 50 minutes of just this person lecturing at you. He'll give you this great story in the beginning, then it'll kind of follow up with the educational piece, and then it'll kind of follow up with, kind of professional experience and pretty much like professional, I guess, academic information. But like, it's so interesting because again, oh, and then by the way, I think in the end, he even goes back to the story too. Like, I don't know, maybe there's some additional aspect of it that he didn't cover, or maybe sort of like based on the or maybe not based on the examples, based on the information that like the guest gave, maybe he'll kind of use that information to relate it back to the story. So it's like, it's such a cool podcast because again, it's like 30 to 50 minutes. You get so much from it. And then the idea is it doesn't really bombard you or overload you with information. So that's one I would also recommend. What about you,
Yeah.
man? What about
Plus,
you? What are your
well,
favorite?
I wanted to tag what you said.
Shoot.
Yeah, so like the halo effect, right? How useful is that to know, actually? I think that's incredibly useful, right? If you know that you may assume all these wonderful traits based on just how somebody looks, let's say you see someone who's attractive to you, right? And all of a sudden, because they're attractive, you immediately put them on a pedestal, so to speak, right? And if you know that you're doing that based on, if you knew what the halo effect is, you gave a name to it, you gave a definition to it. It wasn't just something that you assign, or you don't even assign. This is just unconscious. This is something you automatically do. Well, let's say you're somebody who's a reactive sort of individual, right? But you've given a name to this phenomenon. You've given a label to it. You can recognize when you do it, right? Well, then you add that level of self-awareness there, right? Where you may, instead of having be reactive the next time, you may be, not to sound self-helpy, proactive, right? You may then be able to take control of that situation and experience a sort of growth in that aspect, because you won't be behaving the same way over and over again with these people that you automatically think are amazing just because they're attractive, let's say, right? But yeah, to answer what your question, how could I not talk about Rogan, right? Like Joe Rogan, right? So first of all, I first heard of Joe Rogan when I used to listen to Opie and Anthony. Their show that was like Howard Stern. It's like you could call it like a comedy sort of radio show that was on Sirius XM. Actually, it went through a lot of different stations, but the last iteration of it was on Sirius XM. So I'd listen to this show all the time. How did I get into it? I forget. You remember this website, newgrounds.com?
No.
Or eBaum's World?
No.
Okay. All right. So that's fine. That's fine. Okay. That's probably good that you didn't know that. That explains a lot, actually. So, but, yeah, I got introduced them through like a clip on there, got interested in that show, started listening to that show. I got into the people on the show. I thought they had wonderful, what was cool about Opie and Anthony, by the way, was that Opie sort of took a liberal sort of perspective to everything, and Anthony took a very conservative perspective. And then Jim Norton, who's a comedian who started out on that show, didn't start out, but he was a big part of that show. He had a very balanced perspective. So all these three people in unison, the way that they would talk about things, whether it's from a comedic standpoint or an actual just social, psychological perspective. Like, for example, they used to talk about guns on the show, and the subject of like whether you should because of school shootings and all this, should guns be banned, or that kind of conversation. So Opie didn't mind if they're banned. If you don't have access to a
Mhm.
gun, then how can you perform a crime, right? Simple as that. If you don't have it, you can't do this shit. If people just had knives, it's not like with a knife you can, with like an automatic rifle, like shoot like a lot of people at
Mhm.
once. You're limited. All the other people can see you're stabbing somebody and run away,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Okay, that's logical. Anthony, however, took a different stance. He said, "No, it's my Second Amendment right. I want to be able to protect myself. What about all the legal firearms that criminals potentially get a hold of?" And then he cited like Chicago as an example of a place where the gun laws are very strict, but it has the highest crime rate in the country. And then
Right.
he started talking about stuff like that. And like the way I grew up was very everything catered towards that sort of and I like it. I don't get me wrong. I really like this sort of way, like that liberal sort of mindset, because grew up in New York,
Right.
right? So it gives you that sort of and you grow up in diversity. Like all my friends, every single like is from everywhere,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So that I love these things. But there's certain things that were like also taught to me, like, oh, guns automatically bad. This, like these things automatically
Mhm.
bad. And then when I would hear these other perspectives, it's not like I immediately changed my mind. Oh, like because you have to have some level of discernment. You can't just automatically, you hear an opposing argument that sounds good. Obviously, you're not going to just go with it right away, but if you're open enough to take it in, it does start to make you think and consider, like, oh, okay, I didn't see it that way, right?
Right. And isn't
So
like that the point of like these podcasts, right? Like they're pretty much like they give you these nuanced perspectives that when you're in kind of like a bubble or whatever, you don't really get, whether we're talking about like the media or whether we're talking about, I mean, not necessarily newspapers, because that's not a fair assessment. But let's say maybe the online kind of platforms that most people are used to reading, right? So for my thinking, it's like with the podcast, a lot of times you get people who kind of see the world in a much more, I guess, for lack of a better term, complete way, where they could kind of see people, where they could see different arguments, and they could even see people, right, as sometimes kind of not fully informed, right? Not to say that they're wrong or they're right per se, but to say that there's much more sort of nuance and there's much more complexity than what we're kind of used to sort of being. I was going to say bombarded with, which is not maybe not a fair term, but what we're pretty much given. Yeah.
no, it's I agree with you. No, yeah, I agree with you because, in fact, I had this hunch like ever since I was a little kid because I always had this thing where whenever I would have opinions about things, I always considered them from like a million different, well, not literally a million different perspectives, but I noticed that it was very different than how I saw most people doing things. Not to say like, oh, this is some special way of thinking, blah, blah, blah. I was very because of that style of thinking, I was also very reactive and had a lot of flaws. So it's not a perfect mindset to start out with. You have to like integrate um, a way to be in the world with that looking at all these different perspectives. Because if you're so reactive to all these different perspectives
Mhm.
that your focus is too spread out.
Right.
There were people who were that I respected who had very narrowly focused certain perspectives on
Mhm.
things, and because of that certainty they were also very just they were very congruent. They felt very good to be around too. So that's actually uh, there's things wrong with it, but the thing is, when I started hearing like a show like Opie and Anthony, that was one of my first times being introduced to nuanced thinking in a way, although I didn't even know it was called nuanced thinking at the time. I couldn't give a name to it and understand like
Mhm.
what is this thing where you think in different perspectives, right? In fact, back to Rogan, because it's kind of like where it started. He was a guest on their show, and many times. And anytime I listened to him talk, he did that thing that I resonated with, where he looked at things from multiple different perspectives. In fact, he would even edit himself while he's saying something and also point out what may be wrong with what he said,
Mhm.
which I thought was crazy because nobody did that as far as what I was used to.
Right.
Like, I felt like I was the only person who try to do that, because there I would get into like lots of arguments with people and stuff like that, and I used to try to like get them to come to my side by saying like, no, no, here's what's wrong with what I'm saying. See, I'm willing to admit it, right? I'm willing to admit there's something wrong with what I said. So like, could you do that too? They didn't, right? And I didn't know how the mechanics or the dynamics of that worked. But yeah, I'd listen to him on that show. Always had these balanced opinions. Also, interesting ways of looking at things. Like I feel bad that like I don't have a specific example coming up. Like I almost want to mention like his perspective on marijuana and psychedelics and stuff like that, but
Right.
it's not. But nothing specific comes to me to really wax on.
Yeah.
So, but why I brought up Opie and Anthony, he also, because he was a guest on there, that's how I was introduced to him. So that's how I found out about his podcast. In fact, he actually credits the creation of his podcast to one of the hosts, Anthony Cumia, because what happened is Anthony, these people are rich because of their successful radio show. So he builds like a recording studio in his basement. It looks so professional. Desk, graphics in the background. Like you didn't really see anybody doing this kind of thing, except for maybe Tom Green.
Yeah.
But Tom Green did
that first show, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, and this thing was just like that.
All right, Alan, we got to wrap up, man. So, so I know since we're doing 2 shows today, it's time we got to wrap up. So, like, what would you sort of recommend?
Oh, she answered?
Yeah, we're good. So, so what
I
would
hear
you?
Okay.
So what would you recommend in terms of like podcast suggestions, right? If not, let's say particular episodes or rather even particular series, what would you suggest in terms of particular themes? Like what sort of podcast should people be looking for?
Well, I guess it just depends on that's a weird question actually. Not to push back. I just feel like I guess it depends on their interest. Like for example, if somebody is looking for motivation, purpose, a way to sort of understand like the dynamics of social situations and things of that nature. Lex Fridman is good. Eric Weinstein's podcast, although he hasn't released an episode in a while, but that's somebody who's good. Rogan is definitely good all around. You're definitely going to get some slice of life that you care about by listening to Rogan. It just depends on the episode and the guest. So that's the thing. Like you'd have to maybe look for a guest that you think is interesting, that maybe you want to get into as far as that goes.
Absolutely.
Tim Ferriss is excellent. Yeah.
All right, man.
Well, what about you? What do you think?
So okay, I'm gonna give podcast suggestions just before we go. So definitely Lex Fridman, 100%. I mean, obviously I was the one who brought it up. The Hidden Brain is a really great one if you just really want to understand like how our minds work and why we make these certain mistakes, not only in judgment, but also obviously just behavior overall and in decision making, which is a form of judgment. But then also just in the way that we kind of like think and believe, right? So beliefs are always going to be underlying, like the things that we do and think, how we feel. And so what makes this podcast so cool is that it kind of gives you a template for understanding why you kind of fall into certain traps of thinking. So I love that. And then if there's a last one, honestly, man, just like for a fun podcast, I would recommend the Frank Caliendo podcast. Just first of all, I love Frank Caliendo as a comedian. He's funny as fuck. And then like they just shoot the shit about like sports, life, whatever. Once in a while, they'll have like I don't know, somebody who's into politics on it, which is cool. And it's like, it'll kind of be like a curveball because you're like, what the fuck? What are they doing? Like, why is this guy on? But for the most part, it's like just a bunch of guys hanging out.
You know what? Now that we're on the comedy line of things, okay, I'm gonna just suggest a few. Tiger Belly is one with Bobby Lee. History Hyenas with Chris Stefano and Giannis Pappas. Got podcast with Bill Burr. There's another one called Two Bears, One Cave. Tom Segura and Bert Kreischer.
Yeah.
You got me going now that you mentioned, like, I was like, oh, I could talk about
Oh,
comedy.
by the
Okay.
way,
Um,
just before you continue, so so there's this football player named Warren Sapp who was like on the Tampa Bay Bucks, who was like on
he's
my
going to be
favorite.
on their live show.
Yes, yes, yeah. They're doing two bears and one buck, which is really cool.
Yeah, I like how they're promoting it too. They're like, oh, we're gonna see a special show live. They can't say that they're watching the Super
Mhm.
Bowl because that's gonna be illegal or something. You can't like stream it or
Right.
something. So yeah. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of really, really good ones. I like Whitney Cummings. I like and Annie Letterman, Me Inspiration.
Yeah.
She's amazing. Like she's actually like my favorite one of my favorite comics. Kill Tony. But yeah, I digress. I could actually keep naming podcasts, and like I see we have a guest coming in, so I guess
Yeah.
we should just end it off there. Yeah. So
Yep.
guys, if you want to follow us at Seize the Moment Podcast on Facebook and on Instagram, and at Seize_podcast on Twitter. Like, subscribe,
Hit the
hit the
bell.
bell.
And then, yeah,
Yep.
I'll see you guys next
And
week.
thank you. That's right. Thank you so much for watching. And just like Leon said, see you guys next week.